Cyberpunk 2077 was supposed to define a generation. Instead, it launched with broken quests, viral bugs, mass refund demands, and a Sony delisting so severe it became industry history. Then, somehow, the punchline changed. Update 2.0 and Phantom Liberty turned the same game into a comeback story players now praise. So how did Cyberpunk burn trust that badly, then earn it back? To answer that, we need to start with the impossible expectations. By the time Cyberpunk 2077 became the most anticipated game in the world, CD Projekt Red had already earned something more valuable than attention. It had trust. After The Witcher 3, the studio was seen as the rare major developer that understood players. The game was huge, polished, story-driven, and supported with expansions that felt generous instead of calculated. For many fans, CD Projekt Red was not just another company. It was the studio that could do what the rest of the industry kept promising. That reputation made Cyberpunk different from the beginning. The first teaser arrived in 2013, years before the game was close to release. Then came a long silence, and silence became fuel. With almost nothing concrete to judge, fans filled the gaps themselves. Every interview, every phrase about choice, immersion, and Night City became evidence that this could be the next leap for open-world role-playing games. The marketing cycle pushed that imagination even further. Cyberpunk was not sold as a normal release. It was presented as a dense futuristic city where your background, decisions, combat style, and relationships might all matter. The less people had actually played, the more perfect the game became in their heads. Then E3 2019 turned anticipation into a cultural event. Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage, revealed his role as Johnny Silverhand, and the crowd erupted. In June, that moment, Cyberpunk escaped gaming circles and became mainstream spectacle. The problem was already forming. Expectations had grown beyond features, trailers, or hardware limits. Cyberpunk 2077 was no longer just a game people wanted. It was the future they expected to receive. What CD Projekt Red was selling was not just a city with neon lights. It was the idea that Night City would react to who you were. The life path system was a major part of that promise. Before the story even began, players could choose to be a nomad, a street kid, or a corpo, each with a different opening and the suggestion of a different relationship to the world. Marketing made that choice feel foundational, as if your background would shape conversations, opportunities, and the way people treated you across the entire game. Customization added another layer. Players were shown a character creator, cyberware upgrades, clothing styles, weapon builds, hacking tools, stealth options, and dialogue choices. The fantasy was clear. You would not just play as V, you would build your own version of V, then carve a personal path through a city full of gangs, corporations, fixers, and moral compromises. Developer interviews and gameplay previews reinforced that image. Night City was described as dense rather than simply large, packed with vertical spaces, side stories, and systems that would make it feel alive. The 48-minute gameplay demo in 2018 became a reference point for everything players hoped the final game would be. Fluid combat, branching choices, reactive dialogue, and missions that could unfold in different ways. That mattered because CD Projekt Red still had the benefit of the doubt. After The Witcher 3, players assumed ambition would be matched by execution. If any studio could turn a tabletop role-playing world into a blockbuster open-world game with real consequence, many believed it was this one. For years, Cyberpunk 2077 existed as a promise assembled from trailers, interviews, demos, and trust. The real test would not happen on a stage. It would happen when millions of players finally installed the game, pressed start, and stepped into Night City for themselves. On December 10, 2020, Cyberpunk 2077 finally launched, and the split was immediate. On strong personal computers, many players saw the version closest to what had been advertised. Sharp visuals, dense streets, and moments where Night City could still look impressive. Even there, bugs were common. On base PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, the game often looked and ran like something that was not ready to be sold. Players reported crashes, frame rates that dropped badly during combat and driving, textures loading late, characters appearing without detail, and objects popping into existence a few feet away. Non-playable characters behaved strangely, enemies lost track of the player, police could appear out of nowhere, and traffic systems broke down in ways that made the city feel less alive than promised. Some quests failed to trigger correctly, others trapped players behind broken objectives or forced reloads. The visual glitches became impossible to separate from the game's public image. Cars launched into the air, characters clipped through furniture, weapons floated, faces failed to animate properly. In a different release, some of these moments might have become harmless internet comedy. Here, they became evidence in a larger case. Players had been sold the most anticipated game of the generation, and many received a product that barely held together on the consoles millions still owned. The controversy grew because console buyers felt blindsided. Before launch, review access was limited limited, and many critics were primarily playing the personal computer version. Official footage had not clearly prepared people for how rough the base PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions would be. For players who bought Cyberpunk 2077 on those systems, the issue was not just performance, it was trust. Then came the moment that turned a troubled launch into an industry landmark. On December 18, 2020, Sony removed Cyberpunk 2077 from the PlayStation Store and offered refunds to players who bought it digitally. A blockbuster game from one of the most respected studios in the world had not just disappointed fans, it had been pulled from one of the biggest storefronts in gaming. The delisting was only the start of the fallout. Before Sony acted, CD Projekt had publicly told unhappy console players to seek refunds, first through Xbox and PlayStation, and then by contacting the company directly if that failed. But refund systems were not built for a crisis on this scale. Platform policies, customer support queues, physical copies, retailer rules, and regional differences all collided at once. What sounded like a simple apology quickly became a logistical mess. The damage also moved beyond players. Investors filed lawsuits alleging that CD Projekt had misled shareholders about the condition of Cyberpunk 2077 on consoles before release. The company denied wrongdoing, and the cases were later resolved through a settlement without an admission of fault. Even so, the message was clear. The launch had become a financial and legal problem, not just a public relations disaster. Inside the studio, the human cost became harder to ignore. Reports about crunch and intense developer pressure had already followed the project, and after launch, many individual developers were hit with anger for decisions they did not control. Criticism of management, marketing, and release strategy was fair. Harassment aimed at artists, programmers, writers, and community staff was not. The people trying to repair the game were often the same people who had spent years under pressure to ship it. Cyberpunk 2077 now had two problems. One was technical, and patches could slowly improve performance, bugs, and stability. The other was trust. Players felt misled, developers felt exposed, and CD Projekt Red's reputation for consumer-friendly polish had been cracked in public. Code could be rewritten. Confidence would take much longer. The repair job began with the least glamorous work possible: stability, crashes, broken quests, missing interactions, and performance across machines that were struggling to run Night City at all. Patch by patch, CD Projekt Red cleaned up the game's most visible problems, improved driving, adjusted artificial intelligence, added apartments, transmog, better minimap behavior, and small quality-of-life features that made the world less frustrating to live in. The hardest line came after patch 1.6. CD Projekt Red confirmed that major future updates would no longer target PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Those versions would still exist, but the real rebuild was moving to newer hardware and personal computers. It was an admission that the game people had expected could not fully happen on the oldest machines it had launched on. Then, in 2022, Cyberpunk Edgerunners changed the conversation. The Netflix anime did what the broken launch had made difficult. It sold Night City as stylish, intimate, violent, and heartbreaking. David, Lucy, and their crew gave viewers a focused emotional route through the world, and players returned to the game in huge numbers. The city felt culturally alive again. In 2023, Update 2.0 became the real mechanical reset. CD Projekt Red rebuilt the perk system, changed progression, improved combat, redesigned cyberware limits, and replaced the old police response with a system that could actually escalate. For modern platforms, Cyberpunk 2077 finally started to feel like a completed version of its own pitch. Phantom Liberty was the payoff. Set in Dogtown with Idris Elba as Solomon Reed, the expansion delivered a tighter spy thriller structure, stronger missions, and choices with real consequences. It did not erase the launch. It proved the game could still become something worth defending. Cyberpunk 2077 earned its comeback through years of patches, a stronger expansion, and a clearer version of Night City. But redemption did not refund the trust lost at launch. It only proved repair takes accountability and time. Thanks for watching. Comment below. Is Cyberpunk truly redeemed, or still defined by release?